In this video, we'll begin by delving into the secret relationship between Israel and Lee Kuan Yew's government, uncovering how it developed and evolved. Next, we'll explore Lee Kuan Yew's powerful insights and warnings on the complex dynamics between Israel and Iran in the Middle East. Finally, we'll highlight 3 key lessons from his strategic approach that offer valuable takeaways we can apply to our own lives. In 1965, Singapore was a newly independent nation, vulnerable and defenseless. Its founding Prime Minister, Lee Kuan Yew, realized the country's need for a strong military to ensure its survival. He reached out to various nations, including India, Egypt, and Israel, seeking assistance in building Singapore's armed forces. However, both India and Egypt turned him down. Reluctantly, Lee turned to Israel, despite fears that accepting Israeli assistance might provoke hostility from neighboring Muslim-majority countries. This concern was valid given the tensions surrounding Israel in the Middle East and its conflicts with Arab nations. In November 1965, Israeli military advisors secretly arrived in Singapore under the guise of Mexicans to mask their true identity. They were tasked with providing military training and helping Singapore establish its defense system. Under their guidance, Singapore adopted a conscription system modeled after the Israeli Defense Forces, IDF. Lee Kuan Yew's decision to build a national service army was critical to Singapore's survival. He believed that without the ability to defend itself, Singapore's future would be uncertain, and its citizens would lack confidence in the nation's prospects. Within a short time, Singapore developed a credible defense force with military training, strategy, and discipline influenced by Israeli expertise. Despite their help, Singapore's relationship with Israel remained mostly secret, as Lee did not want to alienate the Muslim-majority countries surrounding Singapore. By 1967, Israel had achieved a stunning military victory in the Six-Day War in which it defeated several Arab nations and significantly expanded its territory. This victory reassured Lee that Israel was a powerful and reliable ally. It also boosted Singapore's confidence in its own military capabilities, which had been built on Israeli guidance. In 1968, Singapore made significant military purchases from Israel, including 72 tanks. A year later, in 1969, Singapore formally established an Israeli embassy in the country. Despite this, Lee Kuan Yew remained cautious about fully embracing public ties with Israel, especially given Singapore's delicate position in a region with a large Muslim population. Chapter 1. Economic Lessons from Israel. While military support was a critical part of the Israel-Singapore relationship, Lee also found inspiration in Israel's economic strategies. At the time, Israel was a small nation, surrounded by hostile neighbors, and yet it had managed to build a strong economy by forging ties with industrialized nations in Europe and America. Israel had also developed unique industries, such as exporting fruits, flowers, and other goods to Europe despite being boycotted by neighboring Arab countries. Lee applied similar strategies in Singapore, seeking links with developed countries and attracting industrial investments from Europe, Japan, and the United States. This approach helped Singapore leapfrog its neighbors in economic development, transforming it from a small trading port into a global economic powerhouse. Despite Israel's significant contributions to Singapore's military and economic development, Lee Kuan Yew maintained a careful distance from publicly recognizing Israel. For years, Israel had pressured Singapore to officially recognize it as a sovereign state and establish an embassy in exchange for continued military support. However, Lee was unwilling to comply immediately, fearing it would create hostility with Singapore's Muslim-majority neighbors. This delicate balancing act reflected Lee's political foresight. He knew that openly aligning Singapore with Israel too early could jeopardize Singapore's stability and security. Eventually, after the Six-Day War and the confidence gained in Singapore's own defense capabilities, Singapore did establish formal diplomatic ties with Israel, but always remained cautious in its public statements about the Middle East conflict. Chapter 2. The Two-State Solution and Singapore's Position. Throughout his leadership, Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore remained committed to advocating for a peaceful resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Singapore consistently supported the two-state solution, which called for the creation of an independent Palestinian state alongside Israel. Lee and other Singaporean leaders believed that peace between Israel and Palestine was essential for long-term stability in the Middle East. He believed that both sides needed to coexist and live in peace, as there was no viable alternative. Singapore's position on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict also highlighted its commitment to maintaining religious harmony, both within its borders and in its foreign relations. Chapter 3. Lee Kuan Yew's Warnings on Middle East Policy. In his later years, Lee Kuan Yew issued stark warnings about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the broader instability in the Middle East. He emphasized that the failure to resolve the conflict would have severe consequences, not only for the region but for global peace. Lee was particularly critical of the role of the United States in the Middle East.
Two countries are rooted in the biblical heritage.
But we have a bond to Israel that's much stronger. It's a moral commitment.
It was created to fulfill the long-standing dream of the Jewish people to return to the home of their biblical origins.
Come, let us declare in Zion the word of God. The founders of my country saw a new promised land.
America's commitment to Israel's security is rock solid and unwavering.
Jerusalem will be the capital of Israel, and I have said that before, and I will say it again.
I recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
You need not be a Jew to be a Zionist. I am a Zionist.
He argued that only the U.S. had the power and influence to push Israel toward a peace agreement with the Palestinians. However, Lee believed that the U.S. had failed to exert sufficient pressure on Israel, largely due to the powerful pro-Israel lobby in Washington. He warned that unless the U.S. took a more neutral and active stance in pursuing a two-state solution, the conflict would continue to fuel anti-American sentiment and global instability. Lee also pointed out that the illegal expansion of Israeli settlements in Palestinian territories was a significant obstacle to peace. He noted that ultra-conservative factions in Israel viewed the land as a divine right, making it even more difficult to reach a compromise with the Palestinians. Chapter 4: The Iranian Challenge and Nuclear Threats. In addition to his warnings about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, Lee Kuan Yew was deeply concerned about Iran's ambitions in the Middle East. He viewed Iran as a major obstacle to peace, driven by its historical rivalry with Sunni Arab nations and its desire to assert dominance in the region. Lee believed that Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons posed a grave threat to regional stability. He argued that if Iran succeeded in developing a nuclear bomb, it would trigger a dangerous arms race in the Middle East. Israel, already believed to have nuclear weapons, would be on high alert, and other countries in the region might seek to develop their own nuclear arsenals in response. Lee expressed skepticism about Iran's claims that it did not want a nuclear weapon, believing that any country in Iran's position would seek one if it had the capability. He warned that the situation could escalate to the point where nuclear weapons were used in the Middle East, with catastrophic consequences. In one of his most chilling predictions, Lee Kuan Yew speculated that the Middle East could be the site of the first use of nuclear weapons since World War II. He believed that the deep-rooted animosities between Israelis and Arabs, as well as between Sunnis and Shias, made the region particularly vulnerable to irrational decision-making in times of crisis. Lee's warnings were not just about military threats, but also about the long-term consequences of failing to address the underlying issues driving conflict in the region. He emphasized that as long as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict remained unresolved, it would continue to fuel extremism, terrorism, and instability. Chapter 5: Lessons for the Future. Lee Kuan Yew's insights into the Middle East, Israel, and global diplomacy offer important lessons for today's world. His pragmatic approach to Singapore's foreign policy, particularly in balancing relations with Israel while maintaining ties with Muslim-majority countries, demonstrates the importance of careful diplomacy in a complex world. Moreover, Lee's warnings about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the dangers of nuclear proliferation in the Middle East remain relevant today. The conflict between Israelis and Palestinians continues, and the threat of nuclear weapons in the region has not diminished. Ultimately, Lee believed that peace in the Middle East was essential for global stability. He argued that only through rational diplomacy, compromise, and international cooperation could the world hope to prevent further violence and conflict in the region. As tensions continue to rise between Israel, Iran, and other nations in the Middle East, Lee's words serve as a reminder of the urgent need for solutions to these long-standing issues. The world can no longer afford to ignore the warnings of leaders like Lee Kuan Yew. In an era of rising extremism, nuclear threats, and global uncertainty, the lessons of the past are more important than ever in shaping a peaceful and stable future. Chapter 6: The 3 lessons that we can draw from Lee Kuan Yew's approach to this conflict. Number 1. Practicality over ideology. Lee Kuan Yew's approach to diplomacy was rooted in practicality. Even though it was politically risky for Singapore to align with Israel, Lee understood that securing military help was essential for the country's survival. He focused on what was practical and necessary, rather than getting caught up in ideology or emotional reactions. In life, we often face difficult decisions. Instead of being swayed by emotions or the opinions of others, it's better to evaluate situations based on facts, and what will benefit us in the long run. Whether it's in relationships, work, or personal choices, being practical and making rational decisions can lead to better outcomes. Number 2, the power of long-term vision. Lee didn't just think about the immediate future. He planned for Singapore's long-term success. Whether it was building a strong military or forging economic ties with developed nations, Lee's decisions were always focused on securing Singapore's place in the world for decades to come. In our personal lives, we should adopt a long-term mindset. Short-term gains can be tempting, but focusing on sustainable success, whether it's in career growth, health, or personal development, will provide lasting results. Planning and patience are key to achieving bigger goals. Number 3, balance and diplomacy. Lee Kuan Yew masterfully balanced Singapore's relationships with Israel and its Muslim-majority neighbors. He understood the importance of maintaining good relations with all sides and carefully navigating complex political landscapes. This allowed Singapore to benefit from its partnerships without alienating others. In our interactions with people, it's crucial to balance different relationships. We may face conflicts or competing interests, but maintaining diplomacy, understanding other perspectives, and finding common ground can help us build stronger, more positive connections in life, whether with friends, colleagues, or family. What do you think about his predictions? Do you think he is right about the situation in Israel and Iran? Please leave your comment below. We would love to hear from you.
Thank you for making it this far. If you like this video, you might want to share it with a like-minded friend. Thank you, and as always, stay blessed.